This is a compilation video of Quickies that were once uploaded to my main channel. I moved them off there since they were cluttering the place up between my main videos. While I have divided each of them up based on anime season, there may be some things from other anime seasons mixed in there, as I may have watched things that were from a prior season during that one. You will find timestamps for each anime talked about in each of these compilations in the description. Thank you. Anime dropped this year, number 1, Estab-Life, Great Escape. 2 episodes watched, 3 out of 10. Now, I've got nothing against 3D CGI anime. I think it can be done well if you put the time and care in, but that's not really the case here, is it? Estab-Life acts like it doesn't need to have its audience understand anything, and that the power of cute teenage girls doing an improbable job of combat will be enough to carry it. Surprise, surprise, it's not. All the world building is doled out in throwaway lines that I suppose we're meant to piece together with our understanding of tropes, but that's not really good world building. I don't need a huge info dump at the start of the show, but I do need to at least understand why there's city clusters and why people can't just move freely between them, if I'm gonna understand why the job of these girls is even needed. And if people are going to be willing to put their life on the line to do this big move, it needs to be more realistic and relatable than, haha, what if Yakuza boss wanted to be magical girl? That's not even getting into how the show just looks ugly. Typically, these sorts of shows put their best animation in the first episode to try and woo viewers before the inevitable mid-season drop-off. But the animation was jerky even in the first 2, and the color design was just, ugh. I'm sure there are going to be some people who enjoy this and it's not going to bother them as much, but this one was just not up to my standards. An additional note, I also expect queer baiting out of this that nothing ends up actually happening with. They laid the groundwork for a pair thick in episodes 1 and 2, but I can practically guarantee that nothing will come of it. Anime I dropped this year, number 2, In the Heart of Kunoichi Tsubaki. 1 episode watched, 3 out of 10. I can already tell this isn't for me after 1 episode. Not only does the entire setup of the thing have some really weird implications, but it feels like the show just has one joke that we're going to get over and over, which generally doesn't interest me. I went in getting the impression that it was a coming-of-age story for the female main character. However, it was also abundantly clear that this is a shonen series, not a shoujo. Not to mention, I found the other members of her team really annoying. I think just 1 episode will be enough for me. Thanks. Anime dropped this year, number 3. I'm quitting heroing. 2 episodes watched, 4 out of 10. While part of me does like the idea of combining a workplace comedy with a fantasy world, this one is 100% not doing it for me. To start with, it's not particularly visually interesting at any point. It's not the worst thing in the world, but when something's already kind of bland, a little visual spectacle can punch it up a bit. The main character is, in a word, insufferable. I'm sure there's people who will tell me that, oh, he gets better in the novels, but that's not enough reason for me to keep sitting through him as he is now. The tonal shifts here are actually kind of wild, like the show doesn't know quite what side it wants to fall on. Serious exploration of rebuilding a demon army or wacky shenanigans. It's not lost on me that there is only 1 male character besides the lead that is a man with more than 2 lines, so I think we can all tell where this is going. However, I do have to admire the sheer balls it takes to show off your entire harem in the first episode instead of building it bit by bit. Lastly, this show does a lot of telling and not a lot of showing. Now, telling isn't always a bad thing, mind you. However, if we're going to have a whole episode about how one character is horribly overworked, we need to actually see that. Instead of just showing her sitting at a desk for a handful of shots, most of which are focused primarily on her chest. Alright, anime dropped this year, number 4. Trapped in a dating sim, the world of otome games is tough for mobs. 2 episodes watched, 2 out of 10. Well, let's get this out of the way. This one's not pretty to look at. Not that it's always important, but it's what you might notice first here. Not gonna lie, I was getting bad vibes off the first episode, and things just got worse the longer I watched. It's kind of wild to me that this show basically dropped the whole premise within the first 2 episodes. Like, yeah, he's still stuck in the dating sim world, but he's gotten his ass a bunch of capital and is already the game protagonist's bestie. I wouldn't call that being a mob or a background character anymore. I hear the light novel for this one's pretty well regarded, but I don't think I'd be a fan. The whole thing reeks of thing for women bad energy. Like, otome games tend to be played by women mostly, and this is obviously a poorly designed and written one, but instead of putting the blame on lazy developers, this show treats it like that's just how the genre is. Trust me, I know there are some bad ones out there, but that's true for every game genre. The reason the guy was playing this one before he died was also perhaps the flimsiest thing that I've ever seen. The only real joy this got out of me was the fact that our main character was taken out by a set of stairs instead of our beloved truck-kun. Anime dropped this year number 5. The Greatest Demon Lord is reborn as a typical nobody. 1 episode watched, 2 out of 10. I am actually shocked that there are some people who are saying better than expected about this one. It's not good in the slightest. So to get basics out of the way, the production values are cheap. I bust out laughing when a character turned to the side and their entire face basically deformed. It's also insanely generic looking even when the faces aren't melting. However, the real issues are with the characters. Our main character here is trying to make a friend on an equal level, or something like that. He's doing this after reincarnating and at 10 years old. He still acts like he's never talked to another human being before. Did his parents keep him in the basement for those 10 years? I don't know. It was entirely skipped over. Also, it's hard to make a friend on an equal level with another 10-year-old when you have the mind of a fully grown adult. It's never going to be on a fully equal level. Then again, he's so inept he might as well be a child, I suppose. He's also got insane magical powers. Surprise, surprise. I'm getting real sick of this. I'm a nobody, but I can also fly and incinerate monsters with no thought at 10 years old. The writing is garbage too. I was considering sitting in a second episode of this to be sure of my intentions to drop it, but then the little girl was holding a sword ready to fight off the monster, and then she drops it and says she doesn't care if she dies after the monster shit-talks her for a few seconds. Then screams for someone to save her when she's actually attacked as a result of dropping the sword. Oh, and then she asks the main character why he saved her, like she didn't just cry for help 30 seconds ago. Add in a sudden time skip at the last minute of the episode, and we have a certified member of the trash pile. Anime dropped this year number 6. Don't Hurt Me, My Healer. 1 episode watched, 5 out of 10. It's been a while since I dropped something that wasn't just outright bad. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with this show. I can just tell that it's not one that I'm interested in personally continuing on with. It's a comedy that's clearly taking some pot shots at fantasy anime. However, I haven't been a big fan of a ton of recent shows in that genre, so I don't think it's hitting me quite the same as it would someone who has been, you know? I also think that it has a bit of a bad habit of dragging jokes out a little longer than it should. Like, the joke about the bear being more articulate than anticipated was cute, but then it just kind of kept going. I'm also not quite sure why the show is so fixated on not showing our main character's face. I applaud the creativity it took to try and keep a good deal of it covered most of the time, but I honestly started to find it distracting after a little while. The biggest factor in me dropping this one, besides the fact that it just isn't for me, is that the characters are kind of annoying. Like, I can see the comedy duo thing that's happening in the writing here, but it plays very differently than it would as a stage act, so it's just not working for me. Maybe I'll come back to this someday down the line, but for now, it's gonna be a pass. Anime dropped this year number 7, The Dawn of the Witch. 1 episode watched, 3 out of 10. I took a look at some of the comments on the first episode of this one and saw one that I just have to share because it's so accurate. They turned the blandness dial up so hard on this main character that they broke it. It's true, there's nothing to him, and not in a way that's clear it's a character that you're supposed to project yourself onto because they're a blank slate, but more that he's just there. He just exists and nothing else. Hell, this guy couldn't even muster up any energy at the prospect that he might have the last handful of years of his memory wiped away. I'm not saying that every main character has to have a ton of energy, but they have to have at least something to them. Not to mention that there's a lot of fan service that's just kind of uncomfortable, tons of shots that put a lot of focus on the breasts of one of the characters, but that's not really that much of a surprise given the way she's designed. However, we've got another one of those classic 300-year-old lolly characters here, and of course that makes it okay for us to put in super uncomfy panty shots. Yeah, to the drop list this one goes. I wouldn't have even watched it in the first place if I knew before doing so that it's a spinoff. Anime dropped this year, number 8, Love All Play. 3 episodes watched, 5 out of 10. This is unfortunately just one of those ones that's not for me. Which sucks, because I really did enjoy playing badminton when I was in high school, so I was kind of looking forward to this one. There's just nothing here grabbing me, and there are a lot of other shows that I could be watching. However, I'm not invested enough by any of the characters or anything to put this one into my on-hold list, especially since the plot is very standard high school sports show fare. For people who have an interest in high school sports series, then you're likely going to have an interest in this one, but I need something a little more to make it worth my while. Nothing about it was really clicking with me enough for me to keep going, and I was actually fairly satisfied with just the 3 episodes that I had already watched. I didn't really feel a need to continue any further. In my mind, I can always go back to a show on the drop list as a maybe later, so that's where I'm going to stop with this one. Anime dropped this year, number 9, Aharen-San wa Hakarenai. 2 episodes watched, 5 out of 10. Okay, so this one's a bit odd. You see, the content of the show wasn't something that I was actively upset by while watching. I've stated before that I like a good romance here and there. The thing that I can say that's most damning about this one is that it simply doesn't interest me all that much and wasn't grabbing me since the characters were a little on the bland side. That being said, it was very clear to me that this is a shonen romance, and while I do like some of those, they don't tend to be my preferred romances in the genre, if that makes sense. They're just structured very differently, and I lean a little bit more towards the shoujo appeal. So the characters aren't quite grabbing me, and some of the comedy is cute, but it wasn't quite enough for me to want to stick around. I think this would have been a drop for me either way. However, the factor that really pushed me over the edge was the character design. Look, I get the points that she's small, and I know this is just a fluffy comedy, but you cannot look at her and tell me she's not designed to look like an elementary schooler. There are ways of making female characters look short and small without making them look like a child. Add in that a lot of her mannerisms are sort of childish, like shoving food against the male lead's face until he eats it, and the whole thing takes on a kind of uncomfortable vibe for me. It's not so bad that I'm gonna immediately side-eye everyone who says they like this show, but, combined with liking a handful of other shows, I might. I suppose I should point out that it only took a little Googling for me to see that this author's work is made out of a lot of uncomfy-looking lolly stuff. Anime dropped this year, number 10, Skeleton Knight in Another World. 1 episode watched, 3 out of 10. Oh boy, I sure do love when a show opens up with a rape scene as the very first thing it has to offer. That definitely doesn't completely put me off from watching any further. That's sarcasm, by the way, in case you couldn't catch that. I mean, it's pretty brazen to open up your show like that. Far be it from me to praise Goblin Slayer of all things, but at least that one gave us at least a few minutes to get to know our victims before it did that to them, instead of just opening with it as the first shot of the show. Granted, this has the same issue that while there's an assault happening, the camera places the perfectly posed victim in the center of the frame and does all it can to make the whole thing titillating for the audience. When all the animation of a shot in a scene like this is put into the jiggle physics of the breasts of the woman being assaulted, you cannot convince me that this is meant to be horrifying. Most of the time, it would have had me turning the show off right away, but I did promise myself to at least watch 1 full episode of all the seasonal shows, so I kept going. I found the enthusiasm the main character had for the world to be somewhat endearing and cute, but I could tell the show wasn't going to be for me when he started wrecking things by being overpowered from moment 1. I mean, his only real downside was a lack of cash. For me, if a show's going to have an overpowered main character, then that's something that needs to be built up to, not started with. I understand the show's primarily a comedy, but it's just something that doesn't interest me in general. Then we come back around to that scene that started the show, and he lost any goodwill that the show had built up with him for me so far. He's overpowered, and he knows it, absolutely wrecking an orc in what seems to be just 1 blow, right? Well, instead of getting involved in this essay that's happening, he admits he knows he should, then sits there and wastes a decent amount of time while contemplating the tactics of PvP and just reacting to what's going on. What the hell? Oh, and afterwards, he totally stares at the primary victim while she's getting herself covered up. Like a creep. Not to mention, we're given a shot of her in her underwear, because that's definitely a respectful way to treat your victims. It's revealed right after he's just making sure they're not looking so he can loot the bandits, but we could have gotten that across without a shot of her in her underwear. Oh, and of course, she's giving him the "I have a big crush on you" stare for the rest of the episode after that. From my understanding, it looks like everything outside these scenes is more the tone the show is going for. However, these left such a bad taste in my mouth that I am not interested in seeing any more. Anime dropped this year, number 11, Miss Sachiku and the Little Baby Ghost. 2 episodes watched, 5 out of 10. Okay, I admit I had kind of been putting this one off when it came to watching all the seasonal shows. From the looks of it in the trailer, I could already tell that it wasn't going to be for me. With a few exceptions here and there, I'm usually not into shows that are just cuteness for the sake of cuteness, and it seemed like that was what this was going to be. Still, I finally got around to watching it, and yeah, it wasn't for me. Shocker. What I can say I really did like is the art style that this is going for. The soft colors are really beautiful, and I think it's always nice to see a bit of a change from what has become the typical codified look for an anime. And I think that it was well animated for the genre that it's in. However, I'm not a big fan of the character designs for the ghosts. They all look like they were made to sell you a plushie. I'm sorry, but they literally have plushie proportions right off the bat, and that's kind of hilarious. I also find it kind of weird the angle the show is going for, in that the ghost gives her the energy to keep going at her super unforgiving, unfulfilling, and kind of abusive desk job, rather than the ghost being successful as a reminder to take a break and take time for herself. Maybe someday down the road this changes, but as a seasonal comedy, I doubt we'll get that much into it. It just kind of seems like set dressing for this cute scenarios to play out in. It's really not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things, and definitely wasn't what made me drop the show. It's just a detail that stood out to me is all, though I do think it's very much a reflection of Japanese work culture. Speaking of cute scenarios, I don't actually find the show all that cute. I already pointed out that I'm not into cuteness for the sake of it, and the character designs don't appeal to me, but another factor that's a problem I have is the voice of the little ghost is kind of annoying. It's kind of that trying to be cutesy voice that just ends up getting on my nerves instead. No hate to the voice actress for that, it's obviously the point of the show, it just doesn't jive with me personally. Not to mention the show going, "This is cute." Yes, it is very cute. Look how cute this is all the time. Just kind of feels like it's trying way too hard to press onto me how adorable everything is. I don't find it cute, so the show telling me that over and over isn't really going to change my mind. Let me be clear, I don't hate this show or anything. Like I said, it's just not for me for all the reasons I've given you. However, I committed to giving all the seasonal shows a shot, and that includes the ones that I know I'm just not going to click with. Anime dropped this year, number 12, RPG Real Estate. 2 episodes watched, 4 out of 10. Okay, I'm a bit split on this one, if I'm being honest. Looking at it before starting, I was pretty sure this was going to be a show I just didn't jive with, and I do think that's the case, but there's a bit more to it than that. On one hand, there were a few decent jokes in here, not enough to make me laugh out loud or anything like that, but enough for the, "oh, that's clever" bit of my brain to light up for a second. Like, the downside to one of the properties is that you're required to leave your door unlocked to adventurers, and anything in your dresser is up for grabs as a result. There's also some bits of lore here that I could see growing into something interesting, and even some hints of underlying darkness in the opening theme, but given the setup, I'm unsure on how much this will actually be capitalized on. On the other hand, it's weirdly horny for a cute girls doing cute things show. It was a little off-putting that our first intro to the Dragon Girl was her in her underwear not wanting to wear clothes, but I was willing to let that slide just once as a detail to establish her lack of being human. Even if the whole pantsing of her coworker as the culmination of the joke was kind of gross. However, we also got an unnecessary bath scene in the same episode too, and not even like one of those scenes where it's just them sitting in the bath, but one where we got to see near full frontal with the character's nipples obscured only by a little clump of bubbles. This happens again in the second episode, but she's more covered up that time at least. A little searching around told me this is actually supposedly toned down from the manga too, which is wild to me. I also feel the design of the characters is almost a little lollybait too, despite them seemingly being adults. But that's a whole different subject that I'd have to get into on a different post if people are interested. Not that it's really all that, since the production values are cheap here in a lot of places, and there was this one moment that actually made me lose my mind in the first episode. Take a quick look at this shot here. Notice anything? How about if I zoom in for you? Damn, impressive how she can stand on that since it looks like her foot is twisted all wrong. This is one of those ones that's just kind of fine, but the weird horniness feels out of place, and there's nothing really grabbing me all that much. I might pick it up again if I hear about it doing something interesting later down the line, but I'll be dropping it for now. Anime dropped this year, number 13, Shikimori's Not Just a Cutie, 3 episodes watched, 4 out of 10. It's weird. This one I was pretty sure that even if I didn't love it, I was at least going to like it. Manga readers had been hyping it up, and it looked to be at least interesting. However, that wasn't the case, which is a shame. Every series needs to have some kind of hook to get your interest. It's how these things work. That being said, I'm finding that there are a lot of series out there where the hook is supremely minimal. In this case, it's, what if a clumsy and shy guy had a girlfriend who on a dime can go from being adorable to a cool badass? Here's the problem. What else is there to a hook like that? You have a premise, sure, but what's the plot? What's happening in the story? This show doesn't really have an answer to that, so it just starts running down the typical high school romance bits without much variation except the insane bad luck of the main character leading to badass reactions from his girlfriend. To put it simply, it's boring. Everything this show is doing, I could likely get somewhere else and done better, and that's a problem. The one thing I can praise, besides the beautiful art and color design, is that the main character is somewhat proactive in his relationship. He's doing everything he can to be an attentive and active boyfriend rather than just letting things happen to him all the time, like some other characters I've seen. It's not much, but it's something, and I do have to give credit where it's due. The downside is that I don't believe in the relationship of these characters. I don't know exactly how long they've been dating, but it seems like it's been a good while from the way that everyone treats the relationship like it's something commonplace and it's just current status quo. With that in mind, it's disappointing that you could change just a few lines of dialogue and I would completely believe that these characters are just two friends who have been dancing around things for a while and are too shy to confess their feelings to one another. It's like they're barely together at all from the way they behave. He doesn't even know what kind of movies she likes, something I consider a basic conversation topic to come up even among people who are just friends. I don't know, perhaps I was set up to be disappointed by all the hype that was swirling before the season started, or maybe we already have better romances this season and last season that are making this one seem so bland. I can't say it's the worst thing in the world, but I just don't have any interest in seeing more. Given the side characters are so bland as well that they're practically non-entities, I don't think there's anything I could deem this series but waifu bait. Anime dropped this year, number 14, The Way of the House Husband, 4 out of 10. This had been sitting in my Netflix list for a while now, and I figured I might as well finally get around to watching it after all this time. I had checked out a little bit of the manga a while back, but I never went on a binge read of it or anything like that. At this point, I might though, because doing so would be a far better experience than watching the show. So the issue here is that this isn't so much of an anime, but more of a motion comic, which if that's what you want to do in order to present your material, that's perfectly fine as long as you are willing to fully commit to it. I don't have that much of a problem with the choice to use this style, even though it's not my preferred way to see a manga adapted. The problem comes in the way that they have chosen this as their style, but then also chosen not to preserve the manga's art style that really helped pull those jokes off so much. Usually when you decide to go the route of a motion comic, it's because there is something about the art that you find special, and you want to keep that in your new adaptation, since putting something highly detailed into motion means that you need to either simplify the design or have an absolutely outrageous amount of money, workers, and time to be able to pull it off. Here, though, they chose to simplify the designs, but then didn't give them the full animation that would usually come along with that. It lacks a lot of the intense shading that made those moments of intimidation for comedy really work. If they were going to go for a more limited animation like this, then their goal should have been to preserve the art style in that way, because otherwise it's going to feel like a worse version of the manga, colored in and wiggled around a little. All of this is really unfortunate since the vocal work and comedic timing are fairly solid. I think with a little more effort put into either the art style or a more full animation, it could have kept me watching instead of just dropping it fully in favor of reading the manga instead. Anime dropped this year number 15, A Couple of Cuckoos, 4 out of 10. Alright, I kept putting this one off because it premiered pretty dang late this season. I watched one episode the week it launched and was torn on if it was a show that was going to be my kind of thing or not. On one hand, there were some of the most boring and useless tropes in there, like the undying accidental boob grab, but this time on camera. But on the other hand, the main characters had some pretty decent chemistry, all things considered, and our main guy wasn't some passive fella just drifting through life. So I did eventually give it a chance at a second episode, and what happened there was enough to push me into the dropping it category since it's just not for me. While the opening theme was already kind of tipping its hand about this just being dumb harem stuff, I was hopeful that it wouldn't be. I'm actually a big sucker for the arranged marriage that nobody wants, but they end up falling for each other anyway, if I'm being honest. It's one of those ones that just hits me just right if it's done well. However, the second the main girl's father was like, "I'm so sure your arranged marriage is going to work out that I've gotten a house for you two to live in for the next few weeks," I was out. Because that was my signal that we were going to start gathering up a harem of girls and start shoving them into that house for whatever reason we can find. That's not to say that if you're into this, that's bad. I know it's just not something that I'm interested in. I actually read a lot of harems when I was first getting into manga, but after seeing the same tropes and scenarios come around over and over and over again, I figured out that I simply find them boring. The problem is that in a harem, it's supposed to be a mystery who the main character will ultimately end up with, and it's usually just exceedingly obvious, as it is in this case. I actually went and took a look at the most recent manga chapter to confirm my suspicions, and I was completely right, too. Once I knew I was going to be dropping this, I did a little skimming of the other episodes that are out there, and surprise, surprise, we actually have other arranged marriages in there, and the typical little sister in love with her brother garbage, though this time it is definitely fine because they're not biologically related. They were just raised together and thought they were siblings from birth. I suppose if there is one thing that I can be grateful for, it's that the most outright harem anime of the season, that's not even trying to hide what it is not an isekai show. Truly, nature is healing. Anime dropped this year, number 16, Ashi. 6 episodes watched, 6 out of 10. So when I talked about this show in my series of videos that I talked about anime this season that were passing the 3-episode test, I admitted that this might end up being one that I dropped later in the season, and lo and behold, I was right about that. After watching those 3 episodes, I didn't come back to the show for quite a while since there were other things that were demanding my attention, and when I did come back, it just wasn't grabbing me as much as it did before. I don't place any of the blame for that on the show itself, though. I'm someone that it's pretty dang hard to get me to care much about a sports anime, much less one about a sport that I have little to no interest in. And in this season alone, I've had the bad luck of having 4 sports shows put in front of me. One that I dropped pretty quick, one that I'm watching because I actually like it, one that I'm just watching to see how much more insane it can get, and this one that's doing the anime sports thing quite well, but just isn't able to hold my interest. This isn't to say that I will never come back to the series someday in the future, but for now, I'm just going to set it aside in favor of keeping up on other shows that are actually engaging me.